Hello, hello. Welcome back to Angular Nation. Very exciting to be here with our friends, with Igor Minar. We've been scheduling this kind of for a while, right? And we got it. So today's the day. I'm very excited. I want to send a quick shout out to AG Grid as a thank you for helping us have these cool events. I love this format because we can have a kind of a cozy, because sometimes we talk about things, we don't know exactly everything that's going on yet, but we just kind of talk through things and it's a very informal conversation and I love it. So just to kind of set the tone of what we're talking about here, I was talking to, so Igor is actually, we've been friends for a while. Igor is one of my mentors and I go to him all the time and say, Igor, I need advice about all kinds of things. So we were talking a couple of weeks ago and I was asking him, I was just very curious about, leaving the Angular team, like, what are you doing next? What's going on? And we talked a little bit about, he just mentioned some thoughts that he had about, the future of the web, some things that really are interesting. And this really jumped out to me as very interesting because what his thoughts were, what he mentioned to me about what he's thinking about really lined up so much with big problems that a lot of companies are struggling with. And these are things that all of the enterprise architects are kind of running into, that everybody's talking about. And so I just think it's very interesting. And I said, Igor, you have to come and tell my friends what you just told me, because I cannot explain it as well as you can, but I know that everybody's really going to be interested because these are important things that, big problems that we're solving. So I'm very excited to have you here. Thank you, Igor. How are you? Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm okay. It's still COVID times over here. My whole family is sick with COVID, and I'm catching something. I don't know what it is, so please excuse me if I'm coughing or otherwise making sounds that are not natural. Yeah, it's. I look forward to the discussion, and I've been kind of hesitant because I didn't know how to approach it. So I left Google 3 months ago, and I intentionally didn't want to talk about what I was doing next, primarily because I didn't want it to come across as, oh, Igor is giving up on Angular, there is no hope, and it would just take down the Angular team and all of that. I'm a strong believer in Angular. I think Angular has still a lot to give, and a lot of the stuff that we'll be discussing today is actually still very relevant for Angular. And one of the things that makes me excited about the future of Angular is that Angular has this capability to evolve. Like, that is something that we built into Angular from everything after version 2 was basically about how to make Angular evolve. And that gives me hope that Angular can actually evolve in ways that are aligned with the future needs of the web. It will take a lot of work. It will take a lot of support from Google. And if that does happen, then things are going to be great. I personally felt like I wanted to try something else, and I wanted to work at other companies and work environments where I could learn skills that I couldn't get at Google, and that's why I started looking for other opportunities. And I actually found a company that I really love, and we'll talk about it a lot today. But before we do, here's the deal. I haven't talked about this publicly yet. And you're the first people that I don't know that are going to be learning about this. I've been actually working on a blog post about all of this for like the past 2 months. And it turned into this like 15-page mega blog post about everything, about me, about web, the future, and what I think. I'm very close to getting that blog post out. I think it's going to go out early next week. And what we would like to do here is swear you into secrecy and give you a preview of what I'm going to publish next week, under the condition that you will not talk about it for the next few days. And then once it's out, you're free to do whatever you want. This video will be public. But what I'm looking for is really just feedback, so that I can explain my intentions well in a way that are meaningful to developers, and so that I communicate clearly. I've actually done an experiment like this in the past, where NGB 2016 was this crazy keynote where Angular 4 was announced. I don't know how many of you remember that keynote. What I did is, the night before the keynote, I collected a group of people at the conference, and we locked ourselves in a room, and we prepared the keynote together. And I told them, like, these are the things I want to say. it's going to be kind of scary. I don't want to make it look scary. Please help me. And we just like tested various phrasings and keywords, and it actually, the keynote landed really well, and it was just such an awesome experience to be able to share the keynote with people before I got on the stage and get feedback in real time and see what they were interested in and what they were confused about or what they were scared about, and be able to adjust it before I go on the stage. Because once you're up there on stage and you have slides, like, it's too late. There's only so much you can do. You know, thing the flame wars on Reddit start as soon as you step on the stage. So yeah, does this sound like a good deal? We'll be very transparent with you, and you keep things to yourself for the next few days.
I
Absolutely.
think it's so cool to have these little conversations. I love having this channel and being a part of these conversations before anybody else gets to see it. I love it. Yes, it's so exclusive.
Cool.
And we can hold the recording until you're ready.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So one thing that you probably noticed, if you followed me and things that I've been talking about, is that I'm a big believer in web. And I never really talked about why web, why I care about the web. So one of the things that I do want to talk about is when I talk about my transition is that I want to stick with the web, and I'm sticking with the web because I think web is a very important platform that actually helps to create a better world in ways that are often not obvious to us. Because if you think about the times before the web, people would be able to communicate, but only on small scale, or it was very unidirectional, where people read books, or there was a radio and television, and all of those channels, all of those broadcasting channels were always controlled by people in power and people that had a lot of privilege in the society. And the thing that internet changed is that it allowed us to have this medium through which people could start to communicate freely without censorship, without control. And it really gave voice to people that were not empowered, were not privileged. And that really changed the dynamics. It allowed these virtual tribes to be created and people to help each other in ways that were not possible before because of the geographical separation. And the thing that makes web unique is that this is where these kind of connections, there's these kind of experiences can happen. And I really like that because in the past, I've been through experiences where I realized that really the thing that matters in our lives is what we do while we are here on Earth. A couple of years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I thought I was going to die. And during that short period of time, I was like, shit, like, this sucks. It's too bad. Like, my daughter was just born, and I was like, oh, all these things I'm not going to experience, and all these things that I'm not going to teach her. It sucks. But, that's life. And it was so bizarre because, like, for one weekend, I really thought I was going to die. And it's like I had all of this like experience, this surreal experience of like, oh, okay, so that's the end. And that really puts things to perspective, and it really makes you change your priorities. After the weekend, actually, everything was fine. Like I went through treatment, everything. It took 9 months or so, and I feel recovered, and I've been healthy ever since. But that experience stayed with me, and what I realized is that this is what I want to do going forward. I want to help people. I want to empower people. I want to help to make the world a slightly better place. And internet and web is one way I can do it, and I can do it at scale because I can help change things in a way that allow experiences in these connections on the web happen for many, many people, rather than doing it, helping local shelters or many ways how people help. So web has been with me for this, web has been this medium through which I can do these things. And I started working with web about 15 years ago when I actually joined Sun Microsystems. That's how I got to Silicon Valley. I joined Sun Microsystems as an intern, and I started building web applications. And one thing that I learned through that process is that web, the way the web started, it was really designed for these documents in like static ways. And my experience at Sun was like, how can we use this server technologies to create web applications. So that was like my first exposure to web frameworks. And I worked with Java and Ruby on Rails and PHP and a bunch of other stuff at the time. And I was like, oh, this is cool, but it's also frustrating because this I feel like I'm just concatenating all these strings on the server and throwing them over the wire to the client side, where like this weird document is created, and then people click on things to go back to the server for me to like create new string to throw over the wire back to the client. Like, this is just so inflexible, and just like all these round trips are killing me. And that's where I started. I started with this like what now I call like generation 0 web frameworks, where you had this full round trips, and you had to, everything was just done on either static documents were served from a static web server, or you had this heavy servers, Java, .NET, later Ruby and Python and PHP that were a little more lightweight. But it was still this like, oh, client is dumb, it's very thin, let's just keep all the logic on the server and then push it to the push strings to the browser. And for every interaction, you have to go back to the server. So I was kind of frustrated with this model, and this is when I saw Angular JS in 2019, like 2009 as like these first sketches of Angular JS. I was like, oh, so we could do everything on the client side? Huh, this is interesting. Like, we could have the presentation logic on the client side, we could have the business logic on the client side, we could actually cleanly separate the server, the backend from the front end, and I could iterate on this front end very quickly. Like, this is really cool. So that's why I joined. Mishko back in 2009, 2010, when Angular was just in this like experimental phase. And I'm like, yeah, let's see what we can do with this. And what I did not realize is that that era was just following this transition where Ajax and Gwt and jQuery were like this new movement to like bring more stuff to the client side. And AngularJS and Backbone and Knockout really like pushed everything to the client side. Like, oh, let's just build the whole application on the client side. So now looking back, now I see these like clear stages. Like, oh, when I was at Sun, I was working on this generation 0 web frameworks, where like it was Java backends or static documents. And then with AngularJS in the early 2010s, it was this like big shift from the server to the client, and we started building thick clients with JavaScript. JavaScript got much more powerful. And looking back now that I call that generation 0. And I came up with the terminology because nobody really like classified these things as far as I know.
I remember that, because I remember when we were working on SharePoint 2007, SharePoint 2013 came out, and that's when Microsoft said, we want all customizations to be done in JavaScript, and before they had always been done in .NET. So we were like at a huge company with all these things, and everything had to be moved over to JavaScript. So it was like, yeah. This is why I thought this was so interesting, because I saw these same things too around the same time.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah. So with the generation 1, or first generation of web frameworks, it was really like we pushed things to the client side, made JavaScript a like fully fledged programming language. I remember like when I started working on AngularJS, people were like, JavaScript, like that's not a programming language. That's just like this like little thing for
drop downs.
Like, you can validate a form with it, and that's about it. But we build whole like test-driven development environment with Jasmine and Karma and like all of these things. We just built because we that's what we needed, and over time JavaScript got more mature. And it was just interesting to see whole industry just shift. And we were just so surprised, because it's not like we planned this. Like, we didn't start AngularJS because we wanted to bring the development from the server side to the client side. We just thought, oh, this is cool. Like, this is really solving our problems. Now we can iterate on applications much more quickly. It's much more flexible. We can write tests. Like, testing was so much easier with JavaScript, even in the early days, compared to like testing this Java Java web frameworks that would just spit out strings and all this stuff. So we're like, oh yeah, this is cool. And then we just saw like Flash was being deprecated, and Flash developers started looking for new place to go, and they're like, oh, Angular looks cool. This is like kind of similar, and like all of these Flash developers started to flock to AngularJS, and then .NET, ASP.NET, like those developers were like, oh, we want to do more stuff on the client side, and they saw AngularJS, and they came and like, oh, that's interesting. People really like what we are doing. This is cool. Many people think that there was like a big master plan behind AngularJS. We didn't know what we were doing. We just felt like this was the right direction to go, and we just wanted to explore it. And Google provided us with the time and opportunity to do so. And we had no idea what was happening. But one thing that became clear is that with this Gen 1 web frameworks, they were very focused on moving things to the client side and had opinions about how things ran in the browser. AngularJS provided a little more structure than like Backbone or other solutions. But ultimately, we never had opinions about how to optimize the application, how to optimize the payload. And it was just like, oh, you just write a JavaScript and put it on the static web server, and it's just going to run. And initially, these applications were small, so it didn't really matter because the gains, the performance gains from just moving from the server side to the client side were so huge that even the unoptimized JavaScript was like still orders of magnitude better than this full round trip that was specific to the previous generation of frameworks.
I was going crazy with ng all the things, but we could get away with it because it was so fast. You could just do whatever. It didn't need to be. It could be messy. It was fine. It was so fast, but then it got bigger and bigger.
Yeah, exactly. And when we work on AngularJS, we thought like, oh, people would just have like 5 routes or maybe 10 routes in their application, and a few forms, and that was about it. We never thought that people would, or we never planned for people to like start building these massive enterprise applications with AngularJS. Dollar digest issues. But that's what we started seeing, like all these banks and all these airline companies and all of these like just big enterprises.
Because it gave us new function. Because I built this one little AngularJS thing, and then they were like, oh, can you do this with Angular? Can you do this with Angular? Oh, we need you to do this for us, and we need your help over here. And so that's what happened, is it got, because you have now this new functionality.
Yeah. And one thing that AngularJS got really right was it was incrementally adoptable. Like you could have your legacy application and you could just add this tag, and without the backend guys knowing anything, all of a sudden you started building this client application often without their knowledge. So you could have these like legacy CMS systems and trick them into hosting client-side applications. And that was extremely powerful. And again, like this is one of the things where we didn't know that this is what we were doing. Like this just happened. And now in the retrospect, I'm like, that was a really cool feature. And actually, what proves that we had no idea that this was so impactful was that with Angular 2, we didn't include this feature. Like Angular 2 was all or nothing, with ng upgrade coming only like a year or two later after Angular. And we didn't realize how important the incremental adaptability of this next-gen solution was. So, yeah. But ultimately, as people were building these bigger and bigger applications, the fact that we didn't optimize any of the payloads, and like it was just the whole generation, the first generation, was meant for small to medium applications. But as enterprises got interested in this space, they started building these massive applications, and they were like, oh, $apply is slow, and like all of these things like started like, we don't know what's going on. We have 17 digest cycles, and I don't know, like all of this crazy stuff, infinite digest cycles happening, and it just didn't scale because it was not prepared for it. So that's why in like 2013, 14, we started thinking about like, okay, AngularJS has been around for 3 years at that point. What if we were to do this over? Like, what would that look like? And one thing that we realized is that we didn't need to care about both the runtime performance, but also payload size optimizations. So this is where in like mid 2010s, I clearly see this like next generation of frameworks popping up with like React, Angular version 2, later Vue, later Svelte, all of these. And they have very specific characteristics that are distinct from the previous generation. And those characteristics are, believe it or not, it took us, the generation 0 had no concept of component composition. Like most of it was like this MVC framework or MVVM model view model. Help me out here.
Oh, there's a bunch of them.
MVVM, yeah, model view model. Sounds weird when I say. So there were no, like, there was not concept of components in generation 0. But in generation 1, all of these solutions came out and they're like, oh, obviously we need components. Model view, whatever, yeah.
Okay, so generation 0 is server, right? Mostly
generation
server.
0 is, yes, generation 0 would be like this round-trip application. So like Java, .NET, PHP, Ruby on Rails. And it's kind of odd to like group Ruby on Rails with Java, but fundamentally, like the distinct characteristic is that it was just this round trip. Like
don't forget PHP, Igor.
PHP and Python and Perl, CGI scripts.
Yes.
Anybody? CGI scripts.
So this is like pre-2010 kind of. Carlos, do forget PHP. Hey, I liked PHP. I loved PHP up until I found Angular, and then I never looked back. Okay, so generation 0 is mostly server-side stuff.
0. Then became this transitional phase with Ajax, Gwt, jQuery, where like things were starting to move to the client side. Gwt was like Java, but it would compile into JavaScript that would run on the client side. So that was an interesting approach. It didn't last very long because the impedance mismatch and semantic mismatch between Java and JavaScript is so huge that you just end up debugging this code in the browser that makes no sense to you. But we entered generation 1, which was AngularJS, Knockout, Backbone, Batman. I don't know. There was a bunch of them. Like,
wasn't there like a mustache or something? I don't know.
Ember, of course. I don't know how I'm forgetting Ember. Ember was huge in the Gen 1. And then we entered this transitional period where things were like, oh, we need to start caring about payload size optimizations. And actually, Ember was one of the frameworks that thought about this early on in Gen 1, because Ember was one of the first, if not the first, solution that had a CLI that gave you opinionated build system. And a lot of the Angular CLI ideas came from Ember CLI, because I just admired like all of the stuff that they built. And I wanted that for Angular. So in mid 2010s, we entered Gen 1 with Angular version 2, React. It was Polymer. I don't know how. Polymer was definitely. I totally forgot to mention Polymer in my blog post. I should mention them. And anyway, Ember Ember and Angular were the only two solutions that really survived the Gen 1 to Gen 2 transition. React was the new kid on the block. Later, Vue, Sander. React was the new kid on the block, and Vue later, and even later Svelte. And the defining characteristics were like this component model. We had compilation and transpilation that now were being used to allow us to write code that scaled better, both in terms of like developer ergonomics, but also optimizations and user experience. TypeScript became a thing. So that was around mid 2010. So 2015, 16 was like when TypeScript really started to take off, and Angular adopted it as one of the early ones, and everybody's like, what are you doing? TypeScript, Microsoft, terrible, terrible. Well, look back now, everybody's using TypeScript, and I'm shocked to see that it's the people that don't use TypeScript are now being ostracized. And I'm like, what? That's wrong. Like, people should be able to use whatever they want.
You were trendsetters back then.
Yeah, so
we were always trendsetters.
Always, but sometimes we make decisions where like things do play out the way we foresee, or we foresee, like AOT, TypeScript, AOT, these things like ESM, ECMAScript modules. Like all of these things were things we baked into Angular 2 in 2015-16, and now when you look, like now they are the standard, but back then we were like so early on, like ESM, nobody knew what to do. Like they didn't run in the browser, the semantics were not clear, the syntax was clear, but the semantics were not. So there was a lot of stuff that we had to figure out. But anyway,
so how do you like? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say with Gen 2, like the additional characteristics, we had like this focus on build time optimizations, code splitting, opt-in for server-side rendering. That was new. So Gen 1 didn't have server-side rendering. Gen 2 had a server-side rendering as opt-in. And the way we built it was we just took this JavaScript runtime, Node.js, and took a client-side first framework like Angular or React or Vue, and just jammed it into Node.js and made it run there and spit out strings, serialized HTML that we then hydrated on the client side. So that was interesting, but many people think that the way we do server-side rendering today is like the way it should be. It's really just a workaround for like all of these Gen 2 solutions are client-side first. Like the mindset of the framework is client-side first. So you think about document model, DOM manipulation, and the fact that it runs on the server side is happy coincidence more than anything. Like, yes, there was some motivation, but the motivation was like, how can we make this client-side first solution run in Node.js? And then we just tweak things just enough to make it run in Node.js. But it was never part of the design. Like we would never make a hard architectural decision in the framework, and not just in Angular, but in all these Gen 2 solutions. Like all of the decisions were about client-side first, and then make it run on server. The last thing that is specific to Gen 2 is this CLIs. The age of CLIs came with Gen 2. So React now has create React app, Vue has a CLI, Angular has CLI. You don't have a solution today that doesn't have a CLI. And it's primarily because you need this opinionated build system where you need to provide some extra guidance on how to optimize the application. And if you don't, it's just too hard. The results are not good. If you turn off all of the optimizations that Angular CLI gives you, the payload size of the application is like 90% bigger or something like that. Like we really optimize like 90% of the code that otherwise, like with the Gen 1 approach, would end up in the browser. And this is important because it creates this better development experience. So you have all of these functionality available to you, so you can use very easily. But if you don't use it, then the build pipeline will optimize it away so that we don't drag all of this functionality to the client side and affect the user experience. Does this make sense? These like generations? Tom is nodding.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because this is why I was so. This is the part when we had this conversation that I was like, Igor, you need to come and tell this to all my friends because I'm like, okay, what are you going to say next? And then you were like, hold on, I'm working on a blog post. And I'm like, but what about the next generation, Igor? And you were like, hold on, I'll get back to you. And I was going nuts for like weeks. Like, what do you mean we have to wait for a blog post? What's going to happen next? So you left me in suspense for a while.
So I think that, like, if you look at all of these generations, these generational changes happened because the generation that was current at the time ran out of space for the optimizations and was not able to improve the development experience and user experience with the approach that was very characteristic for that generation. So,
and now we're seeing pain again with what we have now.
Yeah, and it's primarily because we keep on building this, like, the better we make these frameworks, the bigger the application gets, because people are like, oh, so now I can do this and I can do this. And oh, when I was at Google, my biggest client, or our biggest client, Angular's team biggest client, was Google Cloud Console. It's the biggest application at Google. Like most people think that search is big. Google Cloud Console is ginormous. It's 800 engineers working on this front end. When the application is built, the thing that we ship to production, that we deploy to production, which mostly consists of JavaScript, and there's some other stuff, but mostly JavaScript, it's like 3 gigabytes that is deployed to production servers. And we had to break it down. Like this just doesn't scale with this client-side first approaches. So this is why people are clamoring for solutions, how to make the user experience better, because we don't want to ship all this code to all the users. So we started like code splitting and doing all these crazy optimizations. But then you have this separate problem, which is like, how do you actually enable these ginormous teams to not kill each other while iterating on this application? Because if you have 800 engineers, somebody's gonna break something, and if that mistake is gonna affect the entire application, then that really sucks, because you cannot reliably ship anything to production. So you have this problem that was previously described as fate sharing. It's something that when TCP/IP stack was built and the whole internet was built, like we didn't want to have single points of failure. We wanted to just have like these independent nodes that we could update. But if you screw up update of that node, the whole network doesn't go down. This is the thing that we see now with this giant monolithic front ends that we're building with the client-side first approach. And this is why people are looking at things like micro front ends. Like, oh, micro front ends are going to solve everything. I'm not so optimistic, because the problem with micro front ends is that they're built on top of these client-side first solutions. And what that means is that you have this code that needs to end up on the client that is built by all of these applications, by all of these application teams. So let's say you have a big bank, and now you have a checking account team and savings account team and fraud department, and they are all shipping like their modules. If you're using a framework like Angular or others, these frameworks, because of this build optimization pipeline that is characteristic for the second generation, Gen 2, the optimizations depend on global application optimizations. So you have to like know the whole world to be able to figure out, is this symbol used? Is this function used anywhere in the application? If it's not, remove it. If it's used in this lazy loaded chunk, let's defer it to be lazy loaded with that functionality. As soon as you start building micro frontends, then you have to disable all of these optimizations, these global optimizations, because you don't know what the checking account team is going to use and what this other team is going to use. You have no knowledge. You don't see the dependency graph of the entire application anymore, because you're creating this dependency graph on the fly in the browser. And by then, you either have everything available to you, which means you were not able to optimize anything, or you optimistically optimize stuff away, and then as the application runs, it just like you have functions are missing or classes are missing, and just things break. And don't even get me started with like things like version skews and all of this kind of like there's module federation that Webpack is exploring. And when I first saw it, like, yeah, this is an interesting solution heading in the wrong direction, because you either need to disable all of the optimizations, so you end up with just these ginormous applications, or you make trade-offs that break the application. You have version skew issues, or you optimize things away that you actually need, and then things break in production. That's terrible. Like, I don't want to learn about. I want to be able to just deploy things independently, but do it reliably. I don't want to sacrifice reliability. And yeah,
and the problem is when we make these decisions as architects, like it turns out to be because it's a big decision when you're dealing with such a big company that it's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and often like this, it's a lot of pressure. And honestly, like there aren't good solutions. There aren't good solutions. So people are just trying whatever is, maybe this is good enough. Like we're trying to be pragmatic, where it's like, oh, version skew issue is probably not going to be a problem. Like most people will be on the same version of Angular across all of these departments. And at worst, they'll be like just one patch version away. How bad could it be? Well, it's bad because Angular changes the code generation even in patch versions. So actually, module federation, where you have version skew issues, where you say like, oh, you will coalesce different versions of Angular. Like if separate parts of Angular federation require different versions of Angular, even if the difference is just one patch version, you can still have a break-in outage in production, because we don't guarantee the compatibility of the generated code across versions, including patch versions. This is why we don't ship generate code into NPM libraries, because we are continuously changing the generate code. It doesn't happen like in every single patch version, but it does happen frequently enough where we are not confident in shipping the code to NPM. This is why with version 13, we had this like IV partial compilation where we like partially compile things, but don't really generate the code, because that part is not stable. The generation, the collection of metadata is stable, but the generation of code is not. So I'm personally very skeptical of module federations. I would love people to be successful at using them. I just don't understand how it can work with like all of these things being misaligned. And
I've been hearing that from a lot of other people too. But
yeah,
but like
but
it's so popular.
I know,
and
and this
is
is
anything bad, but then I have been hearing concerns.
Honestly, like it's somewhat frustrating for me when I go to conferences and like 1/3 of all talks is about module federation and micro frontends, and I'm just like
yeah,
I don't want to be negative. I just don't know how this can work. What we did.
This is really one of the reasons why I wanted to have Angular Nation, because I wanted to kind of have some guidance there from the experts, because we had questions about module federation about a year ago, and I went and gathered up some people who knew about it and brought everybody together, and we had this conversation and said, should we be using this? And they kind of went, no, but still people are talking about it. But at least like here we can say, okay, we're not going to promote that. We're not going to try to get more people on it. We're not going to say anything bad about anybody. If they want to use it, they can. But we're not going to go out and get more people to come on board with this, because there's a flaw in the reasoning, basically. Like it's not really going to work long term,
and it
right?
all comes down to like all of these solutions are client side first. Even if you have micro frontend and module federation with SSR, you're still using client side first solution that was just co-opted to run on the server and generate the strings. Like all of the fundamental principles and design decisions that were made in the solutions were client side first. So micro frontends, I want it to succeed, but I don't see how it can succeed with the client side first generation of frameworks.
And it's a little hard because I know I've been bugging you going, okay, Igor, tell us the future. Like I want to know, right, what's going to happen. But you kind of have to slow down a little bit to even have that conversation, because before we talk about the future, we have to talk about what are the problems that we need to solve.
What are the problems with the current generation, right? Like we should understand why what we have is not good enough. What are the biggest problems? And for me, the biggest problems is that we keep on building bigger applications. We're building them with bigger teams. These applications are richer. More code is required. The payload sizes are getting out of control. It's getting very difficult to optimize things on the client side. And you have this fate sharing problem where as the teams grow, you want to create independent clusters that can ship to production without affecting all the other teams. But at the same time, you want to provide unified user experience. You don't want the user to go to this bank website or airline website, and every time they click on a link and then get to a new screen, it just looks like a different application. Like you want them to feel like it's a single application. You want to hide the organizational structure behind the application, but you want to do it in a way where you can iterate, and you can iterate reliably and release the small chunks.
We want all the flexibility without any breaking problem, no problems.
And do it
whatever
with
we want.
with
And it has to be easy.
And performant, right? Performant.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
all of these constraints are just like how do you make it fast and easy and just scalable and allow it to be used by a team of 800 engineers? Like it's hard. And I fundamentally came to believe that with the current Gen 2 solutions, it's just not going to work. Like there's some space for improvements and things will be improving. But I think fundamentally we should start looking for other ways to build applications that don't sacrifice all the gains that we made over the years, but solve these hard problems. And when you look at like what is happening in the web space, you'll observe this trend where we're starting to see return to the server side. You can look at SvelteKit. Yeah, you can look at like SvelteKit. You can look at React Server Components. You can look at other solutions that that try to take the Gen 2 solutions and make them work really well on the server. But it's still like this client-side first framework. Let's make it work on the server and build not SPA, but NPMs. So there's this MPAs, so multi-page applications, which is essentially like generation 0 was the OG, the original gangster of multi-page applications, because like every single click was a new page. Now we are starting to return to that with the SvelteKit and this like MPA frameworks. But even more interestingly, I see that this is a good like transitional step. Is it going to be enough? I'm doubtful, because there are all of these like legacy baggage of architectural mindset that is client-side first that is associated with this solution still. But we see now there's like server-first solutions to pop up, which is new and refreshing. Like look at Remix. Remix is like very different approach to building applications. It allows you to build MPAs, but does it with a server-first approach. It's always the question is like, how does it work on a server? Let's make it work great on the server, and let's make sure that the network is fully optimized. And then don't worry too much about the client side. We should make the client side interactive and rich, but that is now less of a priority, because the server side is where the server side is the part that we neglected for all these years. So I think we do need to focus on the server side, but do it in a way where we don't sacrifice the richness of the client side. So I think Remix is a step in the right direction. I think that the richness of the client side is not fully sorted out yet. Like we're still using this like hydration technologies that came out of the Gen 2 solution, the Gen 2 era. Maybe it's going to be good enough. I don't know. Like I don't have a crystal ball, but I just see like this is heading in the right direction. I do think that the client-side hydration, which is the process of like having this static string that you generate on the server and you send to the client, and on the client it becomes a HTML document, and now you need to somehow attach functionality to it so that on the client side you have like, visual effects, or you have even presentation and business logic on the client side. That process is called hydration. Most of the frameworks that do it today, whether it's Angular, React, or Svelte, has this like very crude top to bottom hydration model, where like you start hydrating one node and you just hydrate everything under that node within the component tree. Does it make sense what I'm trying to say? I know that all this stuff is quite abstract. So once you start hydrating, you must hydrate everything, and at that point, you need to download all of this JavaScript to make that happen, because you need to bootstrap the whole application on the client side. So I think one of the challenges that we need to solve is how to make the hydration work in a much more efficient way, where you have this static HTML that you send to the browser, and as the user interacts with it, you hydrate only bits and pieces, and you do it in a very shallow way, where you don't need to like hydrate the entire application or the entire component tree. You hydrate just enough that is necessary to respond to the user input. And there's this interesting solution developed by Mishko called Quick, which actually does this. So Mishko, my partner from Angular, is working on this. And I'm super excited because what he did is he took a lot of learnings from Google. At Google, we have this internal framework called Wiz that does something like this. It's super unergonomic. It's like, this is technology that is used to build some of the biggest applications at Google, but it's very difficult to use because of just the way it's designed. But fundamentally, there are some interesting principles like this. This partial progressive hydration, where or out of order hydration is probably the best term, where you hydrate just bits and pieces as you interact with the application. And we need technologies like this and combine them with Remix and these other server-side first frameworks. So I see a lot of interesting things happening in the right direction. I don't think we are ready for these technologies to be adopted by mainstream developers. But what I want to do is figure out how I can help to push web in this direction. And the thing that I've been thinking about is that if we go to the server, how can we, does this mean like return to the server the way we know it? Like, are we going to be back to running Node.js processes and having to maintain the servers and update containers? And like, I don't want to deal with that. Like, I just want to focus on the front-end application. I don't want to maintain this cluster of servers that will render the front end. And I've been dissatisfied with like functions in the cloud, whether it's Lambda or Firebase or Netlify, all of these solutions, because while they remove the maintenance burden, they add a cold start cost because of how all of this is architected. You have these containers that are provisioned for you automatically by the cloud providers, where Node.js runs, but it's expensive. Like, Node.js process is not cheap, especially if it runs in a container. So you don't have like millions of them available to whoever needs it. Like AWS and all of these other companies, they just spin them up as you need them. And sometimes if your application is not used by millions and millions of developers, millions and millions of users, there's a cold start associated, which can be measured in seconds sometimes. And like, imagine the experience that you go to a URL and sometimes it loads in 200 milliseconds, other times it loads in 5 seconds, and you have no control over this. You can prepay for Amazon to like keep at least one of these Node.js processes around for you, but that's expensive. So I don't think that is the solution. And I've been like looking in the space for a while. And last year I came across this company called Cloudflare. How many of you have heard of Cloudflare?
I used Cloudflare a long time ago when they were brand new.
Yeah. So Cloudflare has been around for 10 years, and most developers don't know about it. And they don't know about it because Cloudflare started as a networking and security company. Like, their first products were in the DNS and DDoS and network security space, not in like front-end development or web development space. But through a series of random events, I came through this presentation by one of the Cloudflare guys called Kenton. And Kenton, I think the presentation is called Fine-Grained, what was it? Fine-grained sandboxing with V8 isolates. And I was like, huh? What does that mean? And I watched the presentation. This is like 2019 presentation. I'm going to drop the link into the chat so that people know what I'm talking about.
I got it, Igor.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so early last year, I saw this presentation. I'm just like, oh my gosh. What they did is they took V8 and they turned it into a server. But unlike Node.js, it's like they actually used the isolates to have a multi-tenant solution. and which means like you have many people using single VM, and you use the isolate model to like sandbox all of these applications from each other. So you don't need to spin up like one process per application. You have just one process for many users. And then within that, you create this V8 isolates into which you load applications. And that process is very cheap and fast. So what that means, you have this like very cheap way to have a JavaScript runtime available, multi-tenant JavaScript runtime available. And one thing that Cloudflare has, and the thing that Cloudflare is good at, is we have this global network that is just like has hundreds of locations around the world where there's like all these servers and caches and all of this stuff, because Cloudflare is a ginormous CDN. It's one of the fastest CDNs in the world. In some metrics faster than Google, which was shocking to me, because usually, like if you're at Google, you think that Google is best at everything. It turns out not at everything. But the point is that what Cloudflare did is just took this V8 isolate model, turned it into a server, and put it into all of these CDN locations around the world, and made it possible for developers to upload JavaScript to them. So what you do is you build the application, you upload it to Cloudflare, and now it's globally available all around the world. And if you make an HTTP request, you hit the nearest location near you, which is often just a few milliseconds away. And now you have this runtime, JavaScript runtime, that you can like is fully capable of running JavaScript, that is readily available to just run it without any kind of startup cost. So like the latency to the server is minimal. And now combine this like very nimble, cheap, and globally available low latency runtime, and combine it with this trend of network getting faster. So we have 5G rolling out, which will redefine what the internet connectivity looks like in densely populated areas. We have Starlink and similar solutions that is being globally deployed that will bring low latency, high bandwidth internet connection to rural areas. Like all of these like conditions are just like aligning up to this big shift from client side to the server, where we don't need to worry about like every single byte of JavaScript, because on the server, like the payload size can be slightly bigger. But also you have more information and more opportunity to optimize things before you send stuff to the client. You also have a possibility to just create this micro service architecture on the server side that it can be applied to also host frontends. So you can solve the problem of fate sharing. And yeah, I was just like, wow, this is interesting. I would like to be part of this. So last November, I joined Cloudflare, and I joined them with a mission to help make this edge computing, this new JavaScript runtime, accessible to mainstream developers, especially web developers, with the ultimate goal of making the web better and helping the world and making things much better. So it was quite an interesting journey. Lots of people helped me because, again, like when I started looking, I had no idea what I was looking for, and there were like all these people that just like people that I knew, but also people that I didn't know. They were like happy to help and give me advice, and it was just so refreshing. So I'm so thankful to all of them. But the biggest surprise was that when I started talking to Cloudflare, one of the things that were like hard requirements on my list was people and culture and like the bigger mission. And what I found is that Cloudflare, the mission of Cloudflare is to literally help build a better internet. Like that's the mission of the company. I'm like, oh, that's what I'm trying to do. That's kind of aligned. And then I started to talking to people, and I just realized, there's so many kind people that care about the world and diversity and just doing good and collaborating and open source and like all of these things. And I'm like, wow, this feels like a new home to me. So yeah, last November, I decided to switch and join Cloudflare. So
this really, I'm starting to understand, because I was surprised. I thought after 10 years at Google that you would take time off before you started your new job. And you
I was
really
so eager
didn't.
to get started. I
I
just,
know you like, I can see that you're excited and you're just like, you
yes.
just jumped right into your new job immediately because I have known you for a long time. But I don't really remember ever seeing you this excited. Like you've always been, working, but not like a kid, like excited, like we're gonna have fun now. I mean, I have, but not like this. So this is fun. So
Well,
now I'm excited too. Okay, I'm sure because I'm seeing some of our friends here who are like watching this and they're excited too. So I want to open it up for questions, but I want to just throw this out there and say, because I know you have work to do, but I just already want to get this on your to-do list, Igor, because the next time you come back and visit us, which I hope is soon, I would really like a demo because I want you to like show off like some of this, show us what it can do. Because when you were talking there at the end about the Cloudflare workers, and I can see all the people with their cameras on are like on the edge of their seats, and now we want to see it and touch it and play with it. So I just want to get that on the list. So we put that on our to-do list because we
yeah,
want to see
absolutely.
it.
I,
We're
I
gonna
would
need a
be
demo, Igor.
I would be happy to. One thing that I want to make sure is that I set the expectations right. The reason why I joined is because I see opportunity to make this much better than it is now. Like if workers were amazing already, people would already be using them, and there would be very little need for me to just come in and help out. I
But you
see
know
that.
us, we're like your beta testers.
Yeah, yeah. So where workers are today, like just to give a little bit of context, like historically, Cloudflare didn't come to build this JavaScript runtime so that we can run applications on it. Like historically, Cloudflare built this technology so that the existing CDN becomes a little more dynamic. So the initial thinking was we want a CDN that will proxy a real application, a real origin, and we're just going to add this little bit of JavaScript so that we can throw in a little bit of magic and just do whatever, like analytics or like just a little augmentation, maybe rewrite the responses and requests as they are coming through the CDN. The thought was not that we will just come in and just build whole applications on this global available runtime. And it still shows, like there's when you start interacting with workers, you will see a lot of that legacy. So one of the things that we are working on right now is just like polishing all this onboarding journeys to make things much smoother for web developers, because it's not smooth today, but it will be. And I'm super excited about how we'll make this technology available to everybody.
I love it. I love being on the bleeding edge, and I love playing with stuff that's innovative, because I know when I first started playing with Angular, it was amazing because I had not been a developer that long, Igor, and all of a sudden I had guys much older than me coming to me and saying, "How did you do that?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's Angular." And they're going, "What's Angular?" And so now it feels like all over again, like it's an opportunity for us, because even, yes, Nuno, Igor joined Cloudflare. Even if we have developers who have not been around forever or are younger, that we get the opportunity to kind of be in that innovative, ride the wave and learn the next big thing. So it's exciting. So I think it's great. I think it's very exciting. And even if it's not completely perfect yet, I think being a part of this and kind of knowing what we should be looking at for next year is very, very cool. So I would love to see demos, even if it's not completely polished yet.
Okay.
You should just always consider us your beta testers. Bring it to us, show us your projects, show us what you're working on. I love it.
Let's do it.
Okay, so just for we have people joining, coming into the Friday Social, because our event ran a little bit long. So for those of you coming in, I just want to say that Igor swore us all to secrecy at the beginning of this call. We are recording this, but we're going to hold the recording for a little bit. So if you're joining, you are also sworn to secrecy. I hope that's okay. Igor, do you have time to stay with us for a little while and answer some questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I would actually love to get feedback from people and see like which of these things are unclear, so I can clarify in the blog post. And for those that joined later, I did swear people into secrecy. I'm working on a blog post explaining all of this, and I'm trying to get early feedback so that I can get that blog post right. So please keep this to yourself, all of this stuff to yourself for the next few days. But hopefully early next week, the blog post will be out. In the meantime, feel free to ask questions, and I'll be as transparent as I can be about the answers.
I knew Jordan would have some.
So my one question is did you feel like do you feel like Google does not recognize this problem and that's why switching was important, or like do you feel like they still really believe that like business as usual is a good approach, like in solving, the current generation of the web?
And also tell him what you said to me about Angular and why Angular is going to do well in the future.
Because I guess that was the one thing is you didn't talk a ton about like why you left Google. Like you talked about the challenge, but if that's the one thing I think people would maybe have
and like
maybe you spelled out better.
A lot of it is just me and like place where I am in my career, where I was looking for a place where I could have much bigger influence than I could have on a company. Like, just think about it. Like when I joined Google, it was 16,000 people. 16,000. Today, in November when I was leaving, it was 160,000.
Holy cow!
It's 10x, and this doesn't account for all the contractors that work for Google, which will multiply that number significantly. So
we were waiting for drama.
Oh, there's not.
No. I guess my feedback was just that you mentioned, like, I think the challenge is very clear, but like why you left Google to approach
because I didn't have an opportunity to pursue this at Google. Like
Gotcha.
that was my challenge, and I really feel like web deserves better, and then I just couldn't do it with Angular anymore. Not because I didn't want to, or I didn't believe that Angular could do it. It was not possible. So
that's kind of what Mishko said when he left. He had really good relationships with everybody on the team, but he just didn't have the freedom to innovate because so many people are counting on Angular that it's like you're kind of stuck in that you can't go crazy and break things. Well, and now he can go crazy and break things.
Well, I think like this is where I think Mishka and I see things slightly differently, where I am still hopeful that Angular is capable of evolving in this direction. Like if the team is supported well and there is sufficient investment into the team to pull this off, it can happen. Because the Angular team is literally the best team I've ever been on, and the engineers are brilliant. So it's possible, but the struggle with where the team is that there's just so much day-to-day maintenance and overhead of just keeping things running. Like there's 2,500 applications running on Angular at Google, on a single version of Angular, and the team has, I don't know what is the latest, but it was like 17 people that support thousands of engineers at Google, which is like, to me, it's just insane. And that doesn't even account for 1.5 million developers externally, where the stack is used very differently. Like the usage of Angular internally and externally is very different because of the build system and optimizations, all of this stuff. So often we actually have to build things twice to make it work both for internal usage and external usage. So the team is very, I feel like the team has been very under-resourced for a long time, and that just creates this lack of opportunities for the innovation.
Yeah, I think it would be nice if there were more resources for the community, but I think that's just not really, it hasn't really been a concern for Google.
I think it is a concern, it's just not a priority.
Yeah. Do you remember why you told me when because I was very interested because it was a private conversation. I was like, okay, Igor, now you've left Google, tell me the truth. Like what's going on with Angular? I need to know.
All the dirt.
Yes, tell me for real. And you said that there was a reason why you really felt like Angular was well positioned for the things that are coming in the future. Do you remember what you told me?
Yeah. I think like with ng update and just the evolution model of Angular, it is possible to make big changes to Angular. Like if you look at Angular version 2 and Angular version 13 or 14, especially when single optional engine module lands. Like that framework is so different. It has changed in dramatic ways over the years, and we were able to do it incrementally. So if we just keep on doing that, great things can happen. But
it's more painless for us too, because all we do is the ng update and then does it. Love it.
Look at Sam. She's already busy pouring.
Sam, how's the pizza? Is there pizza? She already brought me a cocktail.
I'm working on it
while we were talking. Sam, what are you making?
Right now,
mine's Jack and Coke. What is yours?
Mine is something pink and fruity.
Oh, it's gin. We got pink gin.
Yeah, I got some of that here. We got some vodka, so we're just having a party. I don't know. We're gonna.
It's Friday night.
You can't go wrong when you put them together. I mean, anything's gonna be good.
How's the pizza coming along?
I have to make a drink first, you see.
Okay. Yeah.
You can't rush this. It's
She's
officially Friday night. Drink first.
We have our routine pretty much set.
Yeah.
But tonight's special. We're getting a salad with our pizza, so we're healthy today.
Oh, I love it.
All right, I'm going on mute.
Okay. Tom, I saw you had a lot of, you look like you were on the edge of your seat. How do you feel?
Yeah.
Because you're doing some big, you've got a pretty big project that you're doing, right? So you need to know about this stuff.
Well, yeah, I guess I'm working on a real-time analytics. So, we're getting a lot of streaming data, but it's kind of reporting for contact centers at the moment. So yeah, no, I guess I'm excited to just get my head around it and figure out, how see how things evolve and where it's going to go. I know things change so quickly. I mean, it's you got companies migrating from AngularJS to get to Angular, and then by the time they've done that, it's time to do it again.
Yeah, it is interesting how the front end is less. I think I don't want to say less stable, but just there's definitely more churn than in the backend space, and I think it's primarily because it's just so visible and like all of these execs that make decisions about stuff, they see when things don't feel right, or when like it's very easy to measure things and be like, oh, we are dropping users because it takes too long to load the application. So it's very easy to correlate the business results with application performance, and that's why we keep on like trying to push the boundaries. And it's hard. Like web was not originally designed for this kind of craziness that we are doing with it now, but I love it that we are pushing the boundaries and making it possible to build rich applications on this platform. Sandra.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different types of performance, and depending on what kind of application you are building, a different kind of performance matters. If you are doing business-to-business applications for people that are starting up in the morning, working on your application all day, and then leave, startup performance and rehydration is not that much of an issue. Well, if you're trying to sell things on the web, it very much is, and every microsecond counts, because every microsecond you shave off will deliver more web value.
Mm-hmm. But you know what? It's interesting that you say that, because that's what people generally think, that the startup time is not that important. But then you talk to all of these enterprise developers, like Google Cloud. It's one of those applications, the Cloud Console. You don't open it 17 times a day. You just go there and do something and leave. And it literally like has been a big pain for users that it takes so long.
Yeah, but that is a different application, because that is something you go there, you do a setting and you go away. It is not something you're working all day. Perhaps there is a day that you're working in that thing for a longer time. So
it depends what you're doing, right? Like Google Cloud Console supports so many workflows where sometimes you just monitor things, do logs, analysis and stuff like that. So.
But yeah, I'm not talking about the startup time of 20 seconds, but I'm talking about the startup time for like 3 to 6, 7 seconds. That is not a problem for like a business application. That is a problem if you want to sell something. What is a problem for business application is way more the build time, because business application has so much more churn and they need to be updated so much more often. So build performance is there more important than actual startup performance. Runtime performance matters. If the application is sluggish, there's all kinds of wrong. But there are so many types of performance and so many types of users. And quite often this gets forgotten and people say, no, we need to have the fastest startup time. We need to have like instant rehydration, which is all nice and hunky-dory, but you don't always need that if you are doing like application.
But you know what? Those applications, these types of applications that you're describing, if they don't care about performance, the other thing that they do care about is fate sharing and ability to independently release parts of the application.
Yes.
That is a real problem that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and not by doing those micro front ends, because that is just shipping like 40 gigabytes of JavaScript to the front end, and that is a different problem to have. That is just too much. If there would be a solution for that, that would be very, very welcome. And I'm thinking about those things, but I don't really see a proper solution for that, other than basically go back to multiple page applications that every team has its own. Its own
Actually,
page.
one thing that we didn't even touch on, which I do mention in blog post, is monorepos, and how monorepos are actually a better alternative to this problem than better alternative solution to the problem than micro frontends. You can use micro frontends with monorepos, but you can just use monorepos without micro frontends and just deploy multiple applications, and that's often much better.
Yeah, and also you can build a kind of a shell application and put in like different pages in there, which solve the problem between the teams. They all get like the same basic functionality and the out.
This is how Google Cloud Console works. You have the shell application, and you have over 150 modules that you load into that shell one at a time, and each module is independently released by a team that owns it.
Yeah, so there are multiple solutions for multiple problems. I really like working on the fast end, like the sales applications. That is where Miško is also working, where every startup microsecond counts. I think there is also a scale there. And I think currently with Angular and what is going on, we will end up with rehydration in a more flexible way as we have now, and it will be like a proper tool for most of those applications, not all of them, because everything needs to be really quick, or something like quick will probably be a better idea, but we can get pretty close with Angular.
The gap between how Quick does out of order hydration and how Angular does this crude top to bottom hydration is very big. I think for Angular, there's probably a place for this middle ground intermediate solution, because you can't just go from where Angular is today to Quick. That jump is huge. But over time, you can get closer and closer.
That is where I'm aiming at, and that will be nice, because that will mean that in an application you can have like your business-to-business application and your sales application in the same framework, which is so much easier to manage.
Yeah.
But I'm really looking forward on running Scully into an EdgeWalker. That would be cool, and then turning off the JavaScript in the front end. Like this direct.
I don't think we want to there's the discussion on Twitter about like, oh no, JavaScript, like let's just turn off JavaScript and not use it.
A little bit of JavaScript, not as much as there is now.
Then you're basically back to the Gen 0 solutions that we talked about earlier, where you have full round trip and all that stuff. And
the thing is, if your full round trip goes to the edge, it's not as big as a problem as it is now.
Still, think about ZPs, that like elements that expand. Imagine that you click on this arrow, and instead of just like thing like part of the UI expanding and the content being lazy loaded or eagerly loaded and rendered.
There is
Now
an
you have to go
HTML
to the
element
server
that takes
and
care of
fully
this.
reload everything. How do you do animations? How do you you want a lot of the presentation logic to remain on the client side, but you want to do it in a way where it augments what was created on the server and not be client side first and then just make it somehow run on the server. It has to be the other way
We are
around.
on the same page there. It is. You need to be smart, and the truth is somewhere in the middle here. I have done an Angular application where I've taken out the Angular application and put in like a small JavaScript application instead, and that works just fine.
Mm-hmm.
So that is possible. So I'm basically using whatever the people know already in Angular to create all the HTML and then put in some new JavaScript to make it a little bit more smart, which is something we can totally do right now, and which might be a solution for some of the problems.
Do we have other questions from
Yeah.
people we haven't heard from yet?
I want to remind everybody, because we've had a bunch of new people come in. Oh, I guess we finished the confidential part of it because we were going through the future of the web, the future of Angular and Igor and all that kind of stuff. And now
sorry you missed it. Oh, too bad.
But we recorded the whole thing. Actually, I am probably I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the recording. Anybody else going once, going twice? Well, you're gonna stay for a while, Igor, and hang out, right?
I can
Okay.
stay for a minute.
So let me turn off the recording real quick before I do. Can I just, you guys know the tradition here. Will you come off mute for a minute and just help me thank our guest?
Thanks, Igor.
Yay!
Thanks, Igor.
Thank you, Igor.
Yeah.
All right, stay.
You rock, Igor.
Oh.